What are you buying?
Hi there, Presley here. It's been nearly 20 years since the release of the original Resident Evil 4 on GameCube. Resident Evil 4 is considered one of the greatest games that was ever made. The thought of this game being remade is quite a controversial topic. However, with the success of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake, Resident Evil 4 Remake seems a dead certainty. Rumour has it that Resident Evil 4 Remake has been in development for a while now. A further rumour has stated that the development on Resident Evil 4 Remake has halted due to development reboot. The game is now expected for release in 2023. Let's look at ways the developers could make the most out of a Resident Evil 4 Remake. Firstly, as I mentioned before, many fans believe that this game doesn't even need a remake, as the gameplay, graphics, and story hold up even to today's standards. However, many gamers would like the opportunity to revisit this game and play it on next-gen hardware. One thing the developers need to know from the get-go is that Resident Evil 4 needs far less work than Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 4's gameplay has been the benchmark for the series up until the reboot in Resident Evil 7. The fact that Resident Evil 4 needs far less work than the previous remakes make this a far harder task. The developers will need to find the perfect balance between making this feel like a different experience as with Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake, and keeping loyal to the source material. Once again, enough needs to be changed. The player does not want to know where all the scares are going to be, where all the boss fights are going to begin. This will feel too familiar. Another thing the developers need to be very careful about is the cut content. The Resident Evil 2 remake had a forgivable amount of content cut. One frustrating example is the integration between the two scenarios of Claire and Leon. Most fans would have preferred these kind of details to stay in the game. On the other hand, Resident Evil 3 remake had far too much content cut. After about the midway point of the game was pretty much unrecognizable from its source material. The developers of Resident Evil 4 Remake need to avoid making this kind of mistake again. They could do this by making sure they keep every single location in the game. Even though the original game was very long, I'm sure the PS5 and Xbox, I forgot what it's called. Even though the original game was considered extremely long, I'm sure the next-gen hardware could handle this. Those were some changes that we don't want from the original game. However, now we can look at some changes we do want. Firstly, Resident Evil 4 was considered by many as more of an action game than a survival horror. This was because by the time Resident Evil 4 was released, the old formula was very tiresome. With recent releases including Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake, and of course Resident Evil 7 and 8, the series has gone back to its survival horror roots. So the genre of Resident Evil 4 Remake should 100% be survival horror. I'm sure fans would appreciate if the horror elements outweighed the action elements. This would be a way of making the game feel different but the same. It will be a completely different take on the same story. Sticking with the horror theme, it would be interesting to see elements from the original concepts of Resident Evil 4 make it into the Resident Evil 4 Remake. If you ever saw the lost Hookman version of Resident Evil 4, you would know what I mean. For those of you who don't know what that is, it was a pre-alpha gameplay demo. You should definitely check it out, it's quite interesting. Some elements from that demo that I'd like to leave behind are the tank controls that you can see in there and the fixed camera angles. These are of course extremely dated and shouldn't be used in any future games. Another very weird feature is there's this section where you're fighting possessed toys. Very unusual, leave that behind. But a rather interesting concept from that is that Leon was supposed to be infected with the virus about halfway into the game. This caused him to suffer from horrific hallucinations. One of these was dubbed the Hookman. This was a nemesis-like enemy that literally steps straight out of a painting, and of course this was an unkillable enemy that chases you throughout the game. These hallucinations unfortunately never made it into the final game. Hallucinations was also something that was in the original concepts of Resident Evil 5. I think these should be included in the Resident Evil 4 remake to give it more of a psychological horror feel. Another thing I'd like to see in the Resident Evil 4 remake is that even though it was a numbered entry in the series, it felt like story-wise the game was more of a spin-off. This was due to the very loose connections with previous games. It was almost somewhat of a soft reboot for the series. However, with the remake, it would be fantastic to see the lore integrated more with other games. The Resident Evil 4 remake would also be the perfect time to fix and clear up any plot holes in the story. It would also be a great opportunity to flesh out and expand on the backstories of certain characters, especially Krauser, who seemingly just comes out of nowhere.
7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
Gameplay-wise, Resident Evil 4 was as close to perfection as a game could be. However, there are some tweaks that could be made here and there to optimize the gameplay for this generation. One of them would be to remove the QuickTime events that were scattered throughout the game. Around the release of the original Resident Evil 4, QuickTime events were everywhere. They were very popular for a gameplay feature. However, these days, not so much. They're considered more of a novelty these days, and it would be great if the players can just enjoy their cutscenes without the fear of having to hammer buttons to save their life. One of the worst examples I could remember from Resident Evil 4 was when I was trying to complete professional mode. The bit near the end where you're having the fight with Krauser, he stabbed me in the head so many times because I could not press buttons that fast. Please, so I don't have to break another controller again, take out the QuickTime events. The final thing I'd like to discuss today is to keep the extra features in the game. I'm talking about the Separate Ways mini story and the Mercenaries minigame. Resident Evil 3 Remake had Resident Evil Online, which I never even played. It would be great to keep these single player extras in the game so there's something to do once you complete the story. And that's it. All we can do now is wait and speculate until 2023. Please let me know what you would like to see in the Resident Evil 4 remake. What would you like to keep? What would you like to remove? The top comment from last video goes to Kelvin Locke. As you can see on screen right now, some fantastic ideas. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for weekly gaming videos and analysis. All that's left for me to say is take care, and I'll see you in the next video.